I'm very happy to have the honor to introduce Peg Boyers to you. Peg is one of the two editors. We have both editors of SALMAGUNDI here. And Peg teaches at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs. She's the author of 2 books of poetry, both, I'm happy to say, published by the University of Chicago Press. The first one is called Hard Bread, 2002, and the more recent one is Honey with Tobacco, 2007. Peg writes in form, and I don't mean by that she's a metrical poet. I mean rather that she imagines her way into the forms of paintings or of tapestries or of narratives. So why should that matter beyond the sort of cliches about formality? It matters a lot because she wants not to come first to a subject, I think. She wants not to come first to the poem. The poems are sites of collaboration with other minds. Other minds have been there first, or maybe hundreds of other minds have been there before. One might say that this is a kind of modesty in the way that we speak of translation as modesty. That is a kind of reluctance to be the first to forge a poem. But I think actually that's not the thing to say about this kind of formality. I think on the contrary, that it's an expression of ambition, this drive to re-inhabit forms of expression. Her poems gain resonance, they gain even authority, one can say, from a relationship to older imaginative forms, some of them artistic, some of them religious. She has a wonderful sequence in Honey and Tobacco called Deposition, a lyric sequence of 14 short poems that are spoken by Mary to Jesus, or by Peg to her own son, or both. This sequence is spoken in contemporary English, but the poems derive too from dreams, from a parallel consciousness running alongside the waking mind, as the speaker speaks alongside the idioms of prayer and of scripture. The echoes of vision and scripture, of painting, tapestry, of prayer and speech, of religious worship and familial love, parental care. These echoes are the dimensions of her formality. The poems are always coming at one from at least 2 sides at once. They resonate with a sense not only that her subjects are old and deep, but also with an honest sense as well that the ground beneath even so common an activity as parenting a child, that ground is unsteady and has to be watched closely, and that one rides it. So please join me in welcoming Peg Boyers.
Thanks so much for that introduction. It's very thorough. I feel like I don't have to say anything now. I just go right in. I have a very soft voice, and I'm used to using a mic. I would like to have one on my person at all times, actually. And I'm sort of hoping that I can tap something and it'll become a mic. But please just yell out if you can't hear me, because I would be so sad if I read everything in a whisper, as is my wont to do. So really, I invite you to be rude and just call out if I'm not speaking loudly enough, okay? I'm going to actually start with a couple of poems from Hard Bread, my first book, which kind of actually picks up on one of the themes that Bob mentioned, the idea of translation. These are not literally translations. I wrote a book of poems in the voice of the Italian writer Natalia Ginzburg, using her life, appropriating her circumstances, her friends, and wrote my own poems in that voice. So it's, my American English words, but her experience. So I'm going to read 3 poems only from that book. The first 2 are about her marriage to Leone Ginzburg. He was an Italian scholar and intellectual, and they lived in Italy during the time of Mussolini, and she actually lived into our time. In 1991 she died. And her husband was very active in the resistance. And anyway, I'm going to read 2 poems from that period of just during the war and immediately afterwards. What happened with Leone is that he eventually was put under house arrest, and they both moved to the Abruzzi in the hills in Italy, a little village there. But he continued to do his subversive resistance work and went down to Rome constantly, even though he was being watched. And at a certain point, he didn't come back. And so she decided to follow him. But it was exactly the moment that Mussolini had fallen and the Germans had come in. And actually, things got much tougher in Italy, naturally, when the Germans came in. They were much more efficient in, taking care of their business there, and including, it was very hard for the Jews. So the Ginzburgs were damned in many ways. But anyway, she actually talked the pensione owner of that town into telling the German soldiers that she was a relative, and couldn't they please give her a ride in the military convoy down to Rome. So she and her 3 children rode down with, the Nazi soldiers to Rome to find her, resistance fighter husband. When they got there, he was already in prison. And she didn't get to him in time, and he died. He was tortured and was killed. And so the first poem I'm going to read actually imagines her later remembering the day when she actually dressed in custodial attire, janitor's clothing, and went into the prison and found her dead husband. How she did this, I have no idea, but she really did this to say goodbye to him. And so this poem is about that experience. It's in her voice looking back. It's called Memoria, Regina Coeli Prison. On such a day, an ordinary day, men come and go in the city streets. They buy food and newspapers. They rush to their appointments, faces flushed, pink lips full. On such a day, you dressed in custodian uniform, entered the prison, went to his cell. You saw the hard bed where he had lain, and the blank wall he watched day after day, and the barred window beyond eye level through which his hope leaked month after month. You lifted the sheet to look at his face, leaned over to kiss him in the usual way, but it was the last kiss. It was the usual face, just a little more tired. And his clothes were the ones he always wore, and the shoes were the ones he always wore, and the hands were the ones that broke the bread and poured the wine. Today still, during the hours that slowly pass, you lift the sheet again, and then again you look at his face for the last time and feel again the cold last kiss, the press of stiff, mute lips, and then again the sheet. If you walk down the street, no one walks next to you. If you're afraid, no one takes your hand. And the street is not yours, and the city is not yours. Not yours, the city of lights. The city of lights belongs to others, to the men who come and go and buy food and newspapers. You can look for a while out the quiet window, look in silence at the garden in the dark. Before, when you cried, there was his voice. When you laughed, his diffident smile. But the gate that opened each evening will stay closed now, forever. And your youth has become a deserted house. Fire out, shutters sealed. So this next poem imagines her attempt to put her life together afterwards in Rome. When she was dead, she was there. Post-war Italy was horrible. Her 3 children, she'd had to leave in Torino with her parents. And one project she had, as she was an editor, so she had a job, but one of the things she also planned to do was to complete at least part of her translation of Remembrances of Things Past, Proust's work. She had gone to the Abruzzi to do this, and of course everything was interrupted. At the time, Leone was in trouble, and she hid her manuscript in the flour sack, and then years later actually retrieved it. And so this poem imagines trying to turn back to that work, but also to life itself. There are a few words in it which you probably know, but I'll go over them. Arbeit, a German word for work, as in Arbeit macht frei, the words that were over the gates of the concentration camps. And Foglio Protocolo is just foolscap stationery. And the gilt is not the gilt we all know and love, but just the gold gilt on a book. Translation. Rome, 1945. It was after our wedding I began translating Proust. Each day I'd unfold pages of the great Foglio Protocolo, fill them with Italian equivalents. The foolscap watermark, my emblem. Each night, your corrections, honest, harsh, set me back, pressed me forward. The 16 volumes, a challenge, disguised as a present from a friend, with better French than mine. My first assignment, the romance of red leather, the scent of literature, guilt framing my fancy ambitions. I never mastered this craft. What I was after was the thing itself, never the thing transformed. When you were sent to the Abruzzi, I followed with the Viotti Dictionary, 2 books from the Gallimard edition, and the children. If only I could do this much, I thought, someday I might complete the job. But life and death had still to do their work on me. While you were in Rome, relentless, subversive, I pored over Swann and Odette, the idiocy of passion. Instead, I might have dwelt on you, on our superior union, on the way your wiry hair would scratch my neck when you bent to kiss my breast. Even on the ironic scoffs you'd lavish every time I came to you, begging for approval. Now the war is over. My translation begins anew. How to bend this world into words. Where is the language for loss, longing, futile desire? The season's metaphors run dry. What remains is bare text, stark with nouns, and too few verbs. Work will set you free. Arbeit. A neighbor saved the manuscript. The Germans overlooked the flour sack. Now I'll turn to what I began for you. At least those first 2 books. What to call Geneviève? Can a Madeleine ever become a Madelenina? Here on the Via Uffici del Vicario, what more is there to do? The children are in Turin. We'll make Proust Italian. What else can I change? So actually Natalia, continued. She survived all of that suffering, and she actually remarried. And I'm going to read one more poem from that book, the first book, Hard Bread, which is addressed to her daughter. Her daughter by her second husband, Gabriele Baldini. Baldini was a wonderful sunny spirit and a Shakespearean scholar and translator. He died too young. But they had 2 children together. The first died within a year. The second was a victim of Down syndrome. And this poem imagines Natalia addressing that daughter, Susanna. Susanna lived with her mother all her life and is still living in that apartment in Rome, as far as I know, with a caretaker. We actually went to Rome and looked at the doorbell, and it still has the name Baldini on it. So, letter to a damaged daughter. My womb was worn out by the time it housed you. 2 wars, 2 husbands, too much, too little, too late. I might have tricked time, pushed you through before the scythe struck your brain, missed the crucial chromosome. But the cell went unsplit, non-disjunction, freak mitosis, punished refusal to divide. We blew and blew our thoughts into you, a team of holy ghosts praying to inspire. Oh, for a flame to fan, but the light was out. Only darkness where a mind should be. What resides there? What's inside a head gone dead? What makes you smile, little idiot? Wherefore your optimism, your joy? I'd wished hard for a girl, pictured curls and lacy ribbons, romps through frills, smart glint in eye to match mine, quick wit to cut the maternal ties when the body was ready. But the snipped cord still binds me like a noose. I want to loosen it, cry out for you to undo the knot, but you look on, stone dumb, laugh, and give it another tug. What bargain did I lose? Perhaps I misspoke, and God took you for some other purpose. Iphigenia, the war is still raging. The sea is not calm, and the winds do not favor travel. The joke's on me, little sacrifice. Forgive me. I mismade you, sweet miscreant. Endure now my sad devotion. That poem actually, though it was about Natalia and her living nightmare, was actually drawn from the same sort of place of imagined horrors that my hysterical maternal imagination has led me, and so you'll see the connection in the poems that are in that sequence deposition. But I'm going to start with another sort of poem entirely. So I'm going to start now reading from Honey with Tobacco, and I'll just continue reading from that book. The first poem was written in Umbria a few years ago, and it's in the voice of a dog. And in Umbria, truffle hunting is done with highly trained dogs. It's very competitive there, and people are rather nasty about poisoning each other's dogs and going to each other's places, and so it's all done very secretly. The dogs are trained to work in silence, not to bark, and to work in the dark often. And though there are many other fascinating things about truffle hunting, I won't tell them to you right now. I know you're dying to know. I am a scholar. There are a couple of words that you should know in Italian. Porco cane, which you probably know means pig dog, but it's a kind of curse. It was probably porco madonna or something, and then they changed it to cane. And sono io, it is I. So it's a kind of prologue for this part of the reading. Actually, it's a self-portrait. Bitch diary. Porco cane. Another day breaks with a gunshot and a chorus of yelping bloodhounds after boar. I ache to join in, but stay quiet, loyal dog pig that I am. Pig dog. Purebred cur in a pen. Sono io. The hunt's trained out of me. Bark and growl, the baser instincts, I renounced them long ago. My tail springs up like an erection at the smell of animal. But the chase is forbidden. Always my inner down girl prevails. It never fails. Not for me, the bait of barnyard cats and wild goose foxes. I know not to waste my nose on vulgar game or public sport. I save myself for the hidden and vegetal. I stalk the peculiar scent, wave my tail like a secret banner when I catch the smell, and follow the musk in silence with a steady walk to the still earthbound thing. I paw the surface for a sign, root, mold, fungus, spore, then dig and claw just to the tip of the tuber, till desire trumps dirt, and I lift the truffle. I keep my panting discreet, and always deliver. God, I am one good dog. My mantra, abhor blood. Leave the surface to others. Dwell in the underworld. So I'll read some poems now from that sequence, Deposition, which is, they're all poems that are set in tableau, taken from the New Testament. And I don't really have to say much more about them, except that I wrote them a few years ago in a kind of menopausal panic. And all's well now, but it didn't seem so at that time. So the first one is, before losing you at the market, finding you in the temple. Summer nights at the souk, jugglers and hucksters, vendors boiling at their stands, the three of us, hand in hand, cranky from the heat. My grip on you would loosen, and you'd break away, then come back, then be off again, appraising the tchotchkes, chatting up merchants. You were like that, affable beyond reason. Little god enrobed in light, diving into the crowd, riding it like a wave. And we, the pathetic shore, awaiting you, diminished by every foray, consoled by the returns, until we were the thinnest sliver of beach imaginable. And you were the sea. The next poem is called Annunciation. In our version, your father kneels beside me on the receding checkered tiles, waiting to receive the news. You float before us, raiment billowing, your long boyhood curls blonde and bright as lightning. I am praying the usual prayer, something about protecting you from illness or danger. Your words travel their diagonal trajectory like a bullet, into my ear, through my brain, into my bloodstream. My womb quickens. What was only dread has taken up residence. I am not full of grace. I am not blessed among women. So I'll read, I think, two more from this series. Obviously, these poems are informed by a lot of anxiety and fear. Pietà. This time, the migraine came with a vision bathed in night sweat. I was sitting on the Eames chair, your man's body on my lap, legs and arms, white as casein, draped over mine, spilling onto the cassock. New sores on your legs, dried blood on your feet, and hands. From your chalk mouth, the words, "Forgive me." From mine, the impossible, "No." Actually, I'm going to read two more. This next one actually was written after seeing the beautiful fresco cycle in Orvieto of The Last Judgment by Luca Signorelli. It's just remarkable, where the soul, the body is joining the soul, the Last Judgment, and you see them sort of dragging themselves out of the earth, and they're joining these sort of beautiful, diaphanous versions of themselves. Anyway, this one's called Judgment Day, after Luca Signorelli. Our eager bodies pull through a sea of dirt to join their tranquil souls. Your father and I, together in the same grave. The other soul we seek is yours. We can't relax, we think, on this raft of afterlife until we find it. We notice without shame that we are naked, and that our naked bodies are hairless, which we like, and sexless, which we don't. We look everywhere, turn up earth mounds and stones, but slowly boredom overcomes us, and we stop. Anxiety numbs, perception clouds. We vaguely notice that the rubble around us resembles a Jewish cemetery somewhere, a jumble of gravestones and history just beyond reach. It occurs to us in our fog that you might be among the damned, but that thought is too strenuous to maintain, too heavy for our ever lighter beings to carry in this erasure of ever after, as are all the worries of you, the vitality of daily fear, the eternal madness of parenthood, which turns out not to be eternal. All that is indelible fades. The oblivion of the saved is their damnation. So I'll read one more poem from the sequence, Deposition. And deposition in this sense refers to that genre of paintings about the taking down of the body of Christ from the cross. It has other meanings too, but that's the immediate one. The only thing I wanted to tell you about this poem is that the Wyoming sky that presides over the scene in this poem is the same one which presided over the fate of Matthew Shepard, who was a young gay man who was beaten and crucified on a fence a few years ago in Wyoming. Deposition. I am in the foreground, in mid-swoon, still reeling, red cloak blown open in the sudden storm. Darkness obscures the horizon, and behind me, a construction site, men on a ladder, the fence, which became your cross, and behind the fence, a church spire, blessing nothing. The sword I have always known would pierce my heart, cuts through me. The young corpse slung over your father's friend and namesake is yours. The pasty boy flesh, stark against the weathered arms bearing you, is yours. My women friends are all named Mary. They lean into me, murmuring Aramaic consolations. Bent in sorrow, they catch my fall. A column of light pans the scene from above. The vast Wyoming sky bursts with a waterless electric rain. The Palladian arch framing the scene contains my grief. That's how I know this is a dream. So now I'll change gears completely and attend to the Cuban side of my brain. Before I start reading the first poem, I have to actually tell you a little bit about my crazy Cuban family, and so just settle in. Don't panic. So my mother is Cuban, and she lives in Miami, where a lot of Cubans live, and have lived since 1959, since the Cuban Revolution. And as many of you must know, the first wave of Cubans who came over were actually middle class, and they didn't, they weren't really high on the communist ideal. They had too much to lose. They lost everything there, but they started over. Some of them actually lost family in the struggle. And that was, a long time ago. And whatever they lost or left behind, they tended to be very vocal in their lament and are still whining about it almost 50 years later. Not that they don't have a lot to complain about, but this poem is about that tendency. And the Cubans, who are a rather jolly bunch, actually make fun of their own propensity for whining about their losses. And they have named this La Tuberia, as if it were a state unto itself. Tuve means I had in Spanish. So Cubans are constantly mocking each other for having, grander and grander things in Cuba. In Cuba, I had a mansion. In Cuba, tuve, servants. In Cuba, tuve, amazing jewelry. In Cuba. So it's La Tuberia is what they call that realm where they all came from, in which they all idealize. So this poem is called La Tuberia, and it's in two voices. It's actually called La Tuberia or an earring's lament. That's the other part of it. It's a dialogue. And the two personae are a Cuban earring who's lost its mate in the revolution, and an American. And I think that's all you need to know. It's a lot. But so it's two voices. I'm going to try to do them here without a mic. And pacienza. La Tuberia or an earring's lament. En Cuba tuve... I'm tired of hearing your complaints, all that whining about el exilio, the tragedy of loss. In Cuba, I had the catalog of things, the status, the riches, the opulence of it all. I had a mate. We were a pair. Our mistress was young. We were young. We would dangle on her ear. Concentrate on what you have. Forget the past. And go out on the town, mojitos at La Floridita, dancing at La Tropicana, and later... No, don't tell me about later. In the jewel case, an aqua Tiffany box with white satin interior. Tiffany's from New York? I didn't know you. Would lie together in the pillowy luxury, my ruby top layer and his, aligned. Our bases, please, you needn't. Touching. My diamond waist and his, forming a continuous line. Sometimes we would switch backs. I'd push. I understand that in communities of exile, the population, my piercing needle through his back, his through mine, tends to lose ground politically as assimilation takes place. That's how I liked it best. A little harsh, but sweet. Tú y yo. You and I is what she called us, because our very longing is a constitutive ingredient of not only the condition of exile, but body parts were paired. He and I, forming a single unit, an I and a thou. Apart? Surely you have adjusted. Look, you're mounted on a ring. You're independent and prized. Very attractive for your age, I might add. We are nothing. Longing doesn't quite. One adapts. As to an amputation. And la revolution? Don't make me vomit. So this next poem is Tobacco, and it has an epigraph from a Cuban folk song, from which the title of the book comes. To rid yourself of envy and sin, mix honey with tobacco. There are a few Spanish words you should know, so I'm just going to go through them. I know most of you probably know them, but the most important are tu boca, your mouth, and puros are cigars, Cuban cigars in this case, and no se toca was a refrain of my childhood. Don't touch, basically. Don't touch this. No se toca, no se toca. And every time, one had wanted to touch something wonderful, it was not allowed. And don't be alarmed when I break into song. I will do that, but it won't last long. And it's just, it's a famous Cuban song, La Paloma, and the only thing you need to know is that the words are about leaving Havana. And caciques are the indigenous chieftains of Cuba, but also, I think, all Latin America. And then there are the names of the uncles. Just let them wash over you. Leleng, Pili. Needn't worry about them. And they're wearing these guayaberas. They're rather popular now. White shirts with pleats and lots of pockets. And that's it. Tobacco. Tabaco. Tu boca. Tus bocas. Your mouths, sweet island uncles. Your lips, fragrant with Cuban puros. And you, lifting me in a cloud of smoke for a good-night kiss, passing me one to one with your dark, burly arms, hugging me close so that my hair, my nightie, take back the smell to linger over in bed under the mosquito net. The cousins asleep in rows of cots on the veranda, the ocean breeze billowing the netting so it scratches my neck, the lightest of stings. Little huddles of white, snug as tobacco hills, swathed in gauze, baking the blonde inner leaves, to wrap, ring with bands, and burn. The sound of Mamita and her sisters singing, Cuando salí de La Habana, válgame Dios, Havana puro. My shallow smoker's breath, asthmatic, subverts the soul's infant desire, but the memory of pleasure persists. Tabaco, tu boca, tus bocas, Leleng, Pili, Pancho, and the priest Benjamin, all the tios in starched guayaberas, pleats pressed over their stout middles, tobacco musk of men, chiefs in a circle, smoking the weed like the first caciques Columbus found when he waded to shore at Puerto de Mares, port of seas, port of surfs, port of sorrows. Tabaco, tu boca, no se toca. Tio Cheo, you weren't like the rest. Your arms were smooth and pink and fine, and your breath smelled of guarapo when you leaned over and sang to us in your pitch-perfect voice American show tunes you'd picked up in college before the seminary, before the priesthood, before Uncle Ben nailed you, took off your frock, and drove you to Bellevue, where drugs and shock treatment dulled away desire. Too mad now, even for the Franciscans, banished from their monastery, your habit repossessed, you phone from the asylum asking for cigarettes, still at 80, craving, unrequited. Tu boca, Cheo. I'll close with two poems about my mother. One is about her as a very young and beautiful woman, kind of an Ava Gardner look-alike, and the other when she's old. Now, she's still alive. This next poem is called Playa Colorada. It just means red beach. It was actually a beach in Venezuela that my family used to go to all the time, picnic at. And it was very, very beautiful. And we would go just with lots of equipment and food and just stay the entire day. And servants, and it was quite an elaborate activity. So it's actually called Playa Colorada, but it actually wasn't red. And the expression ponerse colorada is also relevant, which means to become reddened as in shame, to blush for shame. Playa Colorada. It was a beach, like all beaches, only perhaps more beautiful. And the sand was pink, not red. We would arrive in caravans, hampers overflowing with food and drink, like Aziz and his party on the way to Malabar. The colonials and their servants away on an outing. We would stop under thatch umbrellas, towels and tablecloths spread out against the sea. My mother in her skirted swimsuit surrounded by fathers of other children, her olive skin lit through her straw hat. They would laugh and drink beer and leer, while the children did the usual beach things, boring futile tunnels to China, running at waves and then away, daring each other to be swallowed. I would go out by the forbidden rocks and pick off oysters, then give them to the men to pry open, cover with lime juice, and suck dry. Once, I saw my mother sucking an oyster out of another daddy's hand. Her dappled face bobbed and smiled, and her tongue searched the shell for pearls. This last poem was written actually at a moment when my mother seemed to be dying. She's now 89. And it was a few years ago, and she had been falling a lot and just breaking bones and being hospitalized, and then she'd come home and then she'd fall again and breaks more bones and be hospitalized. It was terrible. At one point, the doctors had sort of given up on her. She was semi-comatose, and my sister called us to come and, be there for her in her last hours. So I made my reservation and called my sister, and she said, look, you better just talk to her because she may not be here when you get here. So I'm going to put the phone by her ear and just in case, say the things you need to say to her. So I told her I loved her and all this, and that I was coming down. And then I reminded her of a little story that's embedded in this poem. The story was, story within a story, her younger brother had had his first heart attack when he was 40, and he had survived it in Miami. And he had a terrible time, but then he'd recovered, and he was very happy and zipping home from the hospital. And he passed the undertaker's business. Now, the undertaker in Cuba moved to Miami. He was an old friend of the family's. We, in fact, sold our house to the undertaker. And he was there on Calle Ocho in Miami and recognized my uncle's car passing by on the way back from the hospital. And he waved to him, Leleng, And my tío Leleng, looked out the window at Caballero, the undertaker, and he said, not yet, todavía no, So in our family, todavía no, not yet, became sort of shorthand for I'm not ready to die yet, todavía no. So when I, got to talk to my dear little mom on the phone, I said to her, look, I'm coming down. I know, she, of course, I assumed she couldn't hear me, but just in case, I said, Mimi, todavía no. I got off the phone, went to the airport, and then the phone rang at the airport. My sister said, what did you say to her? She's up, she's talking, she's laughing. They were all kind of annoyed with me because she was really ready to die, poor little thing. And they were all ready for her to die, and, here she is still suffering. So be careful what you tell people. So anyway, that's embedded in here. It's called Abanico Habanero, and it just means Havana fan. And the other thing that you need to know is simply, well, habanero, of course, means Havana, but an habanera is also a Cuban woman, Havana woman. And it's also a song form in Cuban music. And ida y vuelta simply means going and coming. And if you buy a round-trip ticket anywhere, you ask for an ida y vuelta, means a round trip. I think that's all. So this is the last poem I'll read. Abanico Habanero. Now it's for my mother, para mi madre. No, you said, with a snap of the wrist. Not the first. There was never a first fan. A tug at the tattered folds reveals an Asian cliché. Watery pond, mountains, misty trees, generic reeds brushing up in the wind. A strip of painted muslin binds 20 skinny sticks carved of scentless sandalwood. At the base, an ivory ring, and hanging from the ring, like a graduate's tassel, a dozen silk strands, shabby yellow remnant of the wagging tail that once tickled me as it pumped for breeze. You correct me from your hospital bed, a frail bird propped by pillows, stuck in the nest, past magnificence, memory doing the final work of living. We always had fans, the way we always had shoes. From China, never from Cuba. My first fan, the one I remember, was long as my arm and definitely Cuban. A grown-up feminine defense against tropical heat, flapped with flamenco severity to conceal or reveal a coquette smile. Now its stand-in fits in my hand like a toy. Banal landscape bleeding through its verso, lines of the past too faint to read. I assist you gingerly, lift you to your regimen, fold and unfold you in your sick bed. Your bones crack like twigs, refuse to bend with the burden of skin, an armature tired of the form it supports. It bucks its protest, snapping your vertebrae to register its point. One, then two breaks, then the pelvis for good measure. I want to yield to its force, help you make the final break. But the half-hearted heart beats its wing-beat answer. Not yet, not yet. Like your brother Leleng zipping back from his first heart attack, shouting to Caballero, the undertaker, waving from his funeral parlor, "Todavía no." Your spine winds to its base, brittle as a snake's molting, support gone. Only the carapace remains. That and the ambivalent will. Still, you heal. In Cuba, the sign for a fork in the road is a fan, rays spread out like a card hand, flicking out and in, ida y vuelta, paths converging on a single point. Havana fan, abanico, habanero, habanera, mama, old flirt, old worn-out glamour puss, old peacock's tail, ancient ornament, you turn to dust in my hand.